So thanks for coming. You all have fun things to do here at this time of year, so I appreciate you taking the time to get here. I'm going to run us through a presentation just to give you all an introduction to the comprehensive plan document. It's going to be released, I think, in the next few days, so maybe beginning next week. So you can all review it, but I'm just going to give you a preview and just kind of walk you through some high-level things, and then, as Matt said, open it up for discussion and just talk a little bit and see if y'all have any questions or thoughts or anything to share with us. How many of you, this is your first time to participate in any of the input opportunities for comprehensive plan? There's some first timers here. Awesome, that's great. So that means word's been getting out, and so we've been getting new people here. So I'll catch you up for those who are new. My clicker will work here. There we go. All right, so as I said, I'm Brian. I'm the principal of Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, and I'm just one of many people who've been working on this plan for you all. We have a team of people. We have transportation consultants, we have economists, planners, all sorts of people who represent all the different disciplines needed to come up with a plan for, citywide. So, next slide. I'll take this one. So, what is a comprehensive plan? If you're not familiar with comprehensive planning, the comprehensive plan is it's a long-range policy document that guides and establishes the vision for the future. It starts to determine where and how you grow, and has specific action items in it that are intended to accomplish the vision and the goals in the plan. So our process, so far we went through, we've had a number of opportunities for people to be involved. We had a community kickoff here. After that, we had a Q&A there. People shared some thoughts with us. We went back and started gathering some data, researching and learning more about the community. We had our big Planetpalooza event, and then we went away and started working on the draft document. And then that sort of led us up to the point we're at here tonight. And then moving forward, we'll get, there'll be, once it's released and you all have time to review it, you'll give comments to the staff. They'll distill all those comments and give us a set of instructions to start to make edits to the plan, and then it'll begin the official adoption process. So it's kind of continues on. So this isn't your only chance to participate. So as I mentioned, there's a community kickoff. It was pretty well attended and got some good input. We also have these on the table packets where people could do a sort of a self-guided exercise. They could invite friends and family, people they knew, into a small group format, maybe around their kitchen table or something, if they didn't feel comfortable coming to a large venue like this. And so they went through that and were able to give us input. It's great. We have Planetpalooza, as I mentioned. We have different topical meetings, so people come and give us very specific input. We have presentations. We were working on plans that I'll start to show you here in a little bit, and illustrations and things. So it's a pretty fun event there. And then the webpage has been ongoing. And it's not just a place, if you haven't been there, it's not just a place to go and find out when the next meeting is. It's actually a two-way communication. So you can provide input throughout the webpage in different formats there as well. So just kind of an overview. This is the cover of the plan. And got a lot of stuff on these slides here. So I hate slides that have words on them because I start reading and you start falling asleep. So I'm going to go quickly just as a teaser for you. But there's a user's guide at the beginning. So make sure you don't skip this part. Just kind of look at it a little bit. It talks about, kind of what we heard. It talks about really starting to find the things in the plan that you are excited about, that you're a fan of. If there's things you want to give, commentary on, you want to change this or that, give that input. Also recognizing the things that in this plan take time, right? So this is a long-range, multi-year, multi-horizon plan, and so thinking through that. So this kind of gives you just a little bit of understanding what you're looking at as well. There's a vision statement in there, and so I'll read this to you. So the vision statement says, the Athens community envisions their city in 2040 as a place with distinctive Southern character and history and high quality of life for all. By 2040, wise development choices have led to complete neighborhoods and well-funded infrastructure and services rather than sprawl. Downtown and historic neighborhoods are revitalized. The city offers people of all ages and abilities plentiful opportunities to live, work, and play. And so that's kind of just the fundamental guiding vision statement there. And so everything flows forth from that statement. This was created based on input that we received throughout the process thus far. There are also really important things called guiding principles. And so these are the sort of high-level topics that you want to, as you're going forward in the future and you're assessing whether or not you want to make a decision to go this way or that way, whatever the thing is, you always will look back at these guiding principles and say, does this support the guiding principles? So they are embracing individuality, preserve open space, sustain character, strengthen the local economy, promote creativity, expand housing opportunities, enhance mobility, and balance growth and conservation. And then they're all described, but I'm not going to reach all those ones. So in the comprehensive plan, it's set up where there are different elements or chapters, if you can think of it that way. It starts off with a population element and really kind of goes through a snapshot, a state of the union. Here's the composition, the makeup of the community, so it's a good bit of data in there. But it's, some interesting things, and we try to highlight it and make the data easy to use with infographics and whatnot. And then we move on to the economics and employment element. And within that, you'll start each element, you'll see what we heard, little call out boxes. So read those. So those are some of the comments that we heard specifically from the community or from different departments. And a lot of times are things we heard often as well. So make sure you can take note of those. But you'll find in each element as well a list of recommendations, like do this thing in order to accomplish that. So I'll just give you a couple of samples from each of them. So, for economics and employment, it talks about considering adding retail opportunities, retrofitting underutilized spaces into small business incubators, explore the concept of local artisan and maker spaces, and encourage retail around the Athens Sportplex. So those are just a few in the housing element, it gets into all the data and information about housing. And as we all know, housing is kind of crazy these days. It's hard to kind of keep up with it. But a few of the recommendations in that section talk about creating additional opportunities for missing middle housing types, and it describes what missing middle is. So basically, it's a sort of mid-size, mid-scale, and mid-price point housing. And so that's one of the things that's in there. Talks about adopting zoning regulations that allow greater variety of housing types. So you're not only doing new single-family subdivisions, and so you can have, like in the historic neighborhoods, we have a mix of different types of housing, and then encouraging upper floor residential on downtown as well. And the infrastructure element, when we go through that, it starts to lay out kind of how your infrastructure system is set up now, what the assets and the challenges are with that. And then some of the recommendations include things like investing, infrastructure investments should be targeted and really prioritize importance with the growth and conservation map, which we'll get to in a minute. Talking about capitalizing on partnerships within the region and the area, and also public-private partnerships as well. And then something specific like creating a water and sewer master plan. So some of the bigger picture things, require more study, right, than you do in a comprehensive plan. So high recommendations around those sorts of things as well. Community and cultural resources element talks about wayfinding in downtown. So finding ways to feature and emphasize the downtown. You have a great downtown, one of the most useful downtowns that we've seen. You have an actual, good mix of stores and things. Most places we go, it's just antique stores. And so we also talk about having activities in downtown for all ages. So you have people coming in all ages, activating the key public spaces with different seasonal activities and events, and then support partnership with the schools and the higher education. Historic preservation element looks at things like creating a train viewing platform. as outsiders, I know you all as locals may go, oh God, these trains. But for us, it was really neat, and there were some kids, had some kids with us, and kids would stand at the end of the street waiting on the train to come by. So just little things like that. Thinking partnering with other groups that are already focusing and featuring on historic assets. Looking at periodically reviewing the Preserve Athens document, and then having more awareness about local resources, setting up walking tours and things just to facilitate that historic kind of tourism and those sorts of things as well. That don't take too much infrastructure to do. And the transportation element, we talked about updating the transportation master plan. Is one of those things, sort of a bigger picture topic, looking at complete streets policy. Addressing access management as you're building new roads or as you're starting to change the roads, making sure you're being smart about where you're letting people come on and off those roads, so you don't cause a bunch of problems. And then implementing improvements to key intersections as well. The natural resources element, we're looking at where are locations to add additional parks and things. Starting to continue to develop the trail network that you have here. There's a lot of support and enthusiasm for the trail network, and then looking at green infrastructure as you're doing improvements around the city. Land use and community character element. We talked about things like encouraging, supporting compact and mixed-use development. So making like more traditional neighborhoods like you have around the downtown. So as we talked about in the other element, just single-family detached housing. Looking at reviewing the zoning districts, you have your traditional zoning district and seeing if it makes sense to expand the boundaries of where that area is. Is that set up to encourage that type of development? Design standards for buildings and things, materials, and where the building's oriented, sitting on the lot. So go through that, and then thinking about prioritizing adaptive reuse of buildings. So rather than tearing it down, and I love the little, lost my orientation here, little bank building with the drive-throughs that they're like parking spaces now. But one of the things that we looked at is could those little spots be transformed into little incubator retail spaces, or somebody's trying to get a business started. Might be a more interesting and exciting use than just having the cars parked underneath the hotels. So those are the elements, and this is a smattering of some of the recommendations. So. And then we move into the growth and conservation framework. And so the growth and conservation framework is set up with this tier system. And the tiers are really focused on where and to what extent you are having development and conservation, right? And so as we look at that, we started to assign the tiers based on things like very practical things like where do you have utilities and infrastructure already in place? So you can, sort of be smart about that and not have to extend it too much. And then trying to find ways to be a bit more compact and efficient in how and where you're developing, and then prioritizing infill and redevelopment opportunities rather than just always spreading out as you go. So those are kind of the high level. And then this map is set up, each of the colors represents a different tier. So I'm not going to read you all of these things, but the tiers are set up where there's sort of the priority investment area, and that's where you want to focus that because you've got existing infrastructure in place, or there's some really strong economic development reason to have growth occur there. So you're directing growth there. We have two different tier twos. There's an infill investment area, non-residential, infill investment area, residential. And so this is kind of a little next level down from that first one. And so we're looking at some commercial and office areas that you already have, or industrial development, but they're sort of inside the existing utility service areas. So and one is residential, one's non-residential. Getting into tier 3, that's a controlled investment area. We have residential, non-residential. Those are sort of outside the utility service areas currently. And then you have the minimal investment area. And so that's where you're really not trying to emphasize as much. And then preservation area where you're really trying to say like this area should be preserved and left as it is. And so let's not focus on extending infrastructure there. So the tiers are kind of the higher level, and then you go down from that, and then we have these place types. And so the place types are represented on the map here, and they kind of detail it a little bit more specifics here. So we have two different open space tiers. We have the rural, residential, agricultural. So it's kind of low density neighborhoods and agricultural areas that are really intended to remain as they are. You've got a residential subdivision that represents the existing stable subdivisions that are there already, and primarily single family houses. And we didn't hear much discussion about, hey, we should really transform our existing subdivisions into something very different than they are. So it's really intended to kind of leave them as they are. There's a mixed use neighborhood place type that has a wider variety of housing, and that's what I was talking about before, kind of like you'd see in the historic neighborhoods, but not only limiting it to historic neighborhoods, but also allowing it to be in new developments, the same kind of development pattern. We have a suburban corridor, so that's, as you can imagine, sort of along these conventional suburban corridors that are mostly commercial right now. We heard that those aren't necessarily the most photographed parts of the city, right? They may be useful, you may shop on them or whatever, but there's some ways to make them better, and so that's what this place type looks at. We have the neighborhood center, and so you'll see this is. When you look at this map, you actually have to look pretty close because they're very surgical where they're placed. And so the idea there is where there are either existing little small commercial nodes that serve the surrounding residential neighborhood, or even some opportunities where you might create some more, because we did hear people say, yeah, it wouldn't be too bad of a thing to be able to walk to some things near my house instead of having to get in the car for everything. So check out those. It's kind of an interesting place type. We have the innovation village, and so here we're kind of moving away from the conventional office or business park and trying to find some ways to bring innovation in and capitalize on sort of what's going on regionally, and say like we're a hospitable place for innovative businesses to go. And so there's this innovation village concept, and the idea here is not only are you trying to encourage and recruit innovative industry or business, also having some opportunities adjacent to it and within walking distance for the employees, so people could actually walk to work at some of these places. And so that's why we call it the Innovation Village, not just the Innovation Park. There are two different downtowns. There's the downtown core and the downtown neighborhoods, and those are sort of self-explanatory, as you might imagine. So place types, it's kind of that more detailed area level of discussion and description. And then for those of you who were at the Planapalooza, you'll remember we had these focus areas where we did this mapping exercise, and you all put dots on the map to say, here's where what we love, here's areas that are opportunities for something new or different, and here's areas that would have some change and aren't the most loved parts of city. So we drew these specific plans to illustrate some of the ideas that we were hearing about from the community about what is more walkable look like, what is mixed use, what is various things. So for those of you who are new to the process or didn't see this part, these are the areas we looked at. There we call Gateway, Town Creek, Duck Pond, also Big Springs, and then a neighborhood center example. So this is the Big Springs Park area before. There's just orientation. So we showed how we could take this and reconfigure some of the elements of it and make it a little bit more organized and more of a featured area than it is right now. So we still kind of made this grand lawn area. Of course, we featured the little pond area itself, and then we showed some mixed use areas being added in and incorporating into the neighborhood sidewalks and street connections as well. And here's what that looks like. We had our artists do a render of that. So all these are featured in the plan, and they're all explained. Some of these little notes are here, so you can find the number on it and see what it says. So you can study it and get some track. Here's a neighborhood center that we're looking at, just trying to think through what does that look like in this location. This is East Forest Street, next roundabout there, I'm sure you're all familiar with. Usually everybody knows where roundabouts are in town because when they went in, everybody was like, what in the world? What do we do here? And I went, oh yeah, I think we love that roundabout. There's an extra 15. So anyway, there's already some commercial going on in this area. And so we thought, well, how can you illustrate a neighborhood center and actually make it even more special than it even is? So we showed how you can take the existing commercial, reconfigure it, is the element that's here, so how we orient to that, and then make some buildings that surround the roundabout area with the park, the plaza, and then this is kind of what that looks like here. So you could imagine if you lived just off the screen, you could walk to a coffee shop or to the deli or whatever, and get some of your daily needs met there. This is the area we call the gateway. So here's Hobbs coming into 31. And again, by the way, just let me reemphasize that these things that we're showing you are just to illustrate ideas. They're not even to say like, oh, you should do this here, right? Sometimes the owner of the property, is you're not in control of it, the city's not in control of it. Sometimes the owner of the property says like, oh wow, that's so cool. Like, we just got free planning services, and you guys are interested in having us do something like this, count me in. So if you own some of these properties that we're drawing all over here, don't fret, you don't have to do this. So here's the gateway kind of existing conditioning. You have the big strips in here, giant parking lots, kind of like, welcome to Athens. Not the most beautiful entrance. And so we showed how you could start to infill in that parking lot area, how we could start to tie into the ideas of the neighborhood that's conceived to go here, and some of the mixed use elements, and how we can start to prepare this with those corridors. So how do we make this a nice proper gateway entrance into the city, into the downtown? And so here's what that starts to look like. So this is 31 here. Here's Hobbs. So you see buildings pulled up in the street. This sort of grand boulevard, sidewalks, and street trees planted along here, with the plaza. So quite different than the places currently. But people are doing this all over the country. It may seem like just a pretty picture, but these things are literally being implemented all over the country. So. And then we looked at the Town Creek area downtown. We were just fascinated by, you have your historic downtown here, and this great creek that comes right next to it, which a lot of places don't have something like that. So it'd be really great to feature this in a way that it's not currently. So we drew a plan here, sort of showing you some more park network, and showed some infill around it, and started to define the edges of it, and feature the creek and farmers market area, and show some infill in the downtown. And then this is what that could start to look like. So again, I know this is a small screen, especially in the back, it's hard to see this. So make sure you just spend some time. This is for me, it's fun, really fun part of the plan. But I think probably the most important parts of the plan are all those other elements that I went through at the beginning. But this is fun just to start to see what some of that is would be. So moving forward, stay connected. The web page is still up, and so there's still, you can go there, you'll be able to download the draft, you'll be able to give comments and get input there as well. It's athens2040.com, by the way, and make sure you check it out. And the document isn't short. It takes a lot of words to describe and explain and articulate the future vision for the city, but so don't feel like you have to read it all, right? Please do if you're a reader and you like that. But if there are certain things that are just your particular interest, just read that section, that element, and comment on that. I will say, kind of all builds on itself, so it is good to read some of the earlier sections that describe and lay out some of the things, but you don't necessarily have to read it all as a novel to participate in giving input. So let's chat. Any thoughts? For those who are first timers, any questions about what's come before? Here's one thing that I can't do. a lot of times when we're presenting the draft like this, people start saying, well, does it cover this? Or is this thing in there? Or is that thing in there? I promise I haven't memorized it yet, right? And it's been a minute since we actually wrote the initial draft. So we will, you know, it'll be searchable when you go online. You can just, because it's a PDF, you can just hit Control F and then search for words that you're interested in. But with that said, anybody have any questions or thoughts, or you probably have more once you read it, but I think that's, wow, dinner time, I guess, right? Yes, ma'am.
Let's all those different areas, you know, Town Creek and Duck Pond and all that, it wasn't been prioritized.
No, I think, you know, again, because they aren't necessarily intended to say this is what should happen here, it's more to say like, this is what defining open space means, this is how you might, you know, increase tourism or whatever. They're not prioritized per se.
It looked like you presented this one before. Are there any changes from then today on your diagram before and after?
Oh, no, those are about the same. We actually didn't get really much input or pushback on any of that stuff. And again, I think maybe because it is just more illustrative concepts rather than saying, go do this over there, you know.
I will add though, we did present the place types and the tiers before at the Planapalooza, and those have been updated, working
yeah.
with staff and everything. So those will be different.
That's true.
Depending on what diagram you're talking about.
Sorry, I was talking about the end part, well, the
Yeah.
pictures, and she was referring to tiers and places. And the very, very back, and then with the red hands, up under the cloud. Yes.
Oh, yes. Just have to look at this briefly. I think it's certain areas, residential, certain areas. I think you see what makes you residential.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so different housing types. And so what we're, you know, one of the things that we heard about was there, you know, was a predominance of single family detached. There is a need for housing, and you guys are growing like crazy. And people kept saying, we're tired of just getting more development, just like the last development, just like every other town around. And we want to have development that is uniquely Athens and distinct. And so some of those specific recommendations that are in there regarding housing are responding to that commentary.
I'll ask that first.
Sure.
Are you? This residential district. We check that. It's got recommendations on what I can see. Does your plan include that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we know is when you talk about development, people tend to focus on density. I'm not sure how it became such a thing, right? Because if I give you a pop quiz and say, tell me the density in this picture, you would all fail. It's shocking, it's wild. But somehow it's become a thing, like we need density is a concern or something that we respond to as a community. And so what we try to do is focus on things like building types and scale and massing, because what we know is when you go to a historic place and you're walking down the street of grand homes, and let's say they're 1 acre lots, right? And so this is 1 unit per acre, 1 unit per acre, 1 unit. And then you come to one that looks just like all the rest, except for the fact that it has 6 mailboxes and 6 water meters. And that home had been converted into multifamily, but the character of that home fits right in with everything else. And so there's not a perception of density. Now, I think the reason why people target and get so focused on density is because normally density is presented to you in the form of a suburban apartment complex that, you know, people just don't respond well to. Like if you do what we call a visual preference survey and say like, do you like this better or this better? And the one that has the suburban walk-up apartments with a parking lot all around and stuff, it's like everyone's lived in that at some point in their life, but no one's like, oh, I love that. It's just, you know, so.
The problem is, I'm trying to refer to our study buildings, which is basically
Yeah.
And so how are you saying that we should be this?
No, I haven't gotten around to actually answering questions. So, so this is one of those things that, because we write lots of comprehensive plans. I don't remember off the top of my head, did you get the density version or not?
We
so
don't
Jessica's
have,
gonna-
we don't have density numbers. We talk more in terms of, I guess, intensity or so, like, well, in the place types, they'll mention like, this is a more intense or dense place type in the mixed use. Oh, sorry, let me is this on? Okay, is that, okay, sorry about that. I'll say, so we don't have specific density numbers in there. Like that's something that would be evaluated in a zoning ordinance when you're updating that. We don't put those in comp plans, but we do talk about like the intensity of something. So the place types will mention, this is more of a low density place type for your agricultural. You're gonna have larger lots, you're gonna have more single family homes. And then when you get into the mixed use neighborhood place type, you're gonna have more dense kind of residential, some commercial and stuff. So it does talk in kind of terms of density and intensity, but it doesn't give specific numbers.
The reason why we do that is because we write a lot of zoning ordinances. What we find is if we haven't read the comprehensive plan and we're handed a new comprehensive plan and it has density numbers in it, everyone's going like, where did that come from? Why did that density? And then everybody's like, I don't really know. And then you start, now you're bound by it because you put density in something that was intended to study the entire city. And that's such a very, very zoning specific thing. So we are, if we have density, it goes in zoning, typically for us.
Oh, sure. I'll use this. I'll use that microphone. That one is good. So I was saying that we don't typically, like Brian said, put density in a comp plan. That is something that's more common in zoning. In the comprehensive plan, when you're in the place types area, you'll find we talk about like intensity and density, but more in terms of this is a low dense area. So in your agricultural area, you're going to have more density. But when you get up into the mixed use neighborhood area, they might say you're going to have a higher density of uses, a higher density of residential. So we talk in kind of those terms of density and intensity, but not specific numbers. That'll be in the place types area. So in the different place types, they'll talk about kind of different uses and intensities.
All right.
You mentioned, when you showed the areas like the corridor and the the developer property owner in that area not to be concerned about tax base and put a park on great space.
Yeah.
Like in the neighborhood center. How do we address
I mean, we typically have things that's, this is an illustration, illustrating concepts and not intended to, suggest what's going to happen here. So if we haven't put that in there,
It is.
oh, it is. So look for that disclaimer on each page, probably.
And also, in one illustration, you talk about reorienting your gas stations, stuff and stuff.
Yeah.
That's one of that.
When the gas, so typically the way it's done is when the gas station redevelops, as they call do, they say, okay, well, the zoning is set up to, have this intended outcome, and it allows for, or requires the convenience store part of the gas station to actually be pulled up to the corner, to the street or whatever, and the pumps go in the rear. And so you have the, nicer facing part of it, facing the street.
So when you talk about buildings, they brought up industrial street, you're not talking about that. It's one in the village, talking about future development.
Oh, yeah, of course. And even if the zoning, like, because we're, when we write zoning ordinances, typically people are asking for these kind of things. And so when you write the zoning, and it would require that something like that to happen, it's not until somebody decides to redevelop their property. It's not intended to, overnight make something happen. So, Red Hat, yes.
I know you guys have done projects like this all over the country. And so my question is, if a community decides to do something like what you are suggesting as possibility for the neighborhood center, and a neighborhood center has, in that case, tiny mix of a little bit of commercial, all the rest of it is residential. What is the process in terms of eminent domain? What kinds of things have other cities gone through when they have made a decision to do something that is as impacting everything else?
Yeah, so really it comes back to zoning, right? So you would zone the area that you want to have the center occur to allow for that to happen. And by, and I said allow, right, not necessarily even require. Some places, you say, we're not quite sure, this sounds pretty good. We'll essentially make it where you can either do it like it is, or if you want, you can do something that makes a center, imagine if there's a location in the corner and somebody said, that's probably not the best spot for, parking lot or whatever. Like, what if we did a corner store there? And maybe even the owner of the corner store lives above, and it sounds like a bit far-fetched to even think about, but it's the way that all the great towns and cities used to be. So we're just sort of breaking that and allowing for, because most zoning ordinances have done away with that, you couldn't even do it. So the eminent domain is not how we're going for sure.
In your very first meeting, we talked a little bit about R1 zoning with these high density single family homes. These
Right.
horizontal developments that you said are kind of anachronistic now, and cities are moving away and growing vertically. Does this document address that in a way that the planning commission can say, okay, we're not going to go in this direction anymore?
It does, yeah. So and I think too, it's important to note that when we talk about, the pattern right now is just to kind of go out and we say, well, maybe go up. And it's to a degree, right? And so as we think about going up, it's not like, it's like, do we go from, only single family housing to allow like a duplex or a tract or quadplex or row houses in addition to the single family detached houses in the same neighborhood? And you may go like, ugh, that sounds horrible to me. That's okay, you can stay in your neighborhood as it is, right? Some places we're going, and we were literally had a conversation yesterday with a community who wants us to, in their zoning ordinance, we wrote their comprehensive plan and their zoning, to completely do away with exclusively single family detached zoning. You can still do detached single family houses, but it has to be within a mix for new development. And so, and what also in that situation, I'm just telling you the extreme, just to be clear, I'm not saying this is what I'm recommending for you guys to do. But in that case, the action would even allow for existing stable single family neighborhoods. That zoning will go in those neighborhoods too. So if somebody wanted to, redevelop a house and densify a line here and there, whatever, they could do that. So, so the degree to which you go up is I think, important to note here. Yes, I think you had one, and then to you. Yeah.
Yeah. How would you sell some of these concepts that you present to some of our leaders? Obviously, housing changed zoning ordinances. Planning commission can't really do anything other than abide by zoning ordinance. And with exceptions this morning. So how would you speak more about the benefits of bringing parking over here and just things like that, that you showed some case studies, why they were good to why.
Sure. And, you know, in some places we work, they're not as fortunate as you all here, and meaning they're not as desirable of a place to be. And you can judge your desirability based on the number of building permits y'all have pulled in here, right? It's like people, developers want to be here. And so in other places, they may just be, oh, please, could you develop here? And so you're a little less bold in what you do in that situation. When you have as much growth and as much development as you have going on here, it happens quickly. And it is when it's, you know, I remember when we were touring around, I was amazed. I was like, oh wow, this is great countryside. You're like, oh yeah, that's 400 units. That's 800 units. I was like, oh wow, you know. And so there's sort of like this. It kind of looks one way when you're out there, but it's not that way because there's, you know, entitlements have already, you know, been given for different things to happen on property. So you all are having so much growth and so much interest here that you have the ability to simply just set the rules the way you want them, right? And you say, well, what are the best practices? What are the communities that are the most successful, that are the most valuable, that are most resilient in downturns and whatever? What have they done? What do they look like? What are those characteristics? And model your future zoning or your decisions moving forward around that. And so you can, you know, look right now, you know, give an example where we're from, Franklin. It's like we were at the zoning in Franklin, and a year or so ago, and we went through a public process like this, and we asked everybody, what's your favorite development? And it was unanimous, West Haven. Like the people didn't even pause, right? And our second favorite is Berry Farms. Well, if you don't know West Haven and Berry Farms, West Haven and Berry Farms are mixed use, mixed density neighborhoods. And not only are they the most loved by the community and the places where, like the official activity, somebody comes to see the city, they take them to the historic downtown and they take them to West Haven, right? So not only are you proud of it, but when you look at the property values there, it far outperforms any development by a mile on a normal day. But even in the depths of the recession, they were still selling houses while everybody else was growing weeds around foundations that had stopped. And so there's a resilience component to it too. And it adds to the overall image of the city, that character. So you have your downtown and it's great, and like ours is. And so you want to feature that. But then when you have new development, they can also be additive to the character and the image of the city. And so they can have their own centers and be their own thing. But in order to do that, they have to be something that's lovable and something that is representative of that place. And the reason why people love West Haven is that it's set up and fully intended to replicate the things that people love the most about historic Franklin, and it's the downtown and the neighborhood around it. So it's walkable streets with sidewalks and street trees, and you know, garages are not facing the street and certainly not in front of the house. They're in the rear, they're in an alley, or if it's not loaded from an alley, you have a driveway and you drive past the house and the garage. I mean, this is all the stuff you don't know, like, oh yeah, people still do that, you know? Yeah, they do. And so people live above shops in the town center. During COVID, I didn't have to leave because I work in the neighborhood too. I didn't have to leave for weeks, right? We have a grocery store in the neighborhood. We have Chinese, we have dry cleaning, we have a hair. I got my haircut there today. I walk from my office, leave my haircut just for you. And so it's, you know, all of these things that in most neighborhoods, in most subdivisions, let's call it, in most cities around the country are completely impossible. You get in your car to do every one of those things that I just described. So it's not hard, the data's there, and there's so many of these neighborhoods that are built now that you just can pull the numbers. So. Yes.
Are you going to talk to organizations that are fixing to expand facilities?
We have.
Maybe not to us.
What's your organization?
We're going to rebuild Civil War Fort and build a museum. We're going to spend about $15,000.
Okay, well, that's good to know. We have the historic and cultural resources section in the plan, so make sure that you look at that very specifically, because what? Yeah. Well, I think that, you know, that's a great example of, as we go through the process, we touch as many people as we can, we get input from as many groups as we can, just based on what we know or who's showed up. So you're here now, it's good, it is not too late, so thank you for pointing it out. And if there's anybody else or other groups that we haven't heard from, yes?
So that creek you don't know, is it running water?
The creek, is it running water?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
How long it is?
How long? I don't know. When you go down there, it's a little sad, but I actually saw some wildlife in spite of the conditions down there. So you could pretty easily bring it back and make it beautiful and wonderful.
I
So
think that should be number one on the list.
yeah, I think it could have a huge impact because it is so rare to have that water like that right next to your downtown. It's great. So
It's going to be.
yeah,
Yeah, and so, Texas, that one, it's beautiful.
yeah. Great. Yes.
So all this talk about zoning, and then you're here talking about the comp plan. Two-part question. One, do you think that the recommendations in this comp plan stand at odds with our current zoning code? And two, how strongly do you recommend we update our zoning?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing because, you know, the zoning and comp plan have to sync up, right? Well, not in every place, because in some places you actually don't have to adopt the comp plan. The zoning does have to be adopted, but it's good for them to sync up if you do anything with the comp plan, right? And so it's normal when we update a comprehensive plan that it's no longer synced up with the zoning, because the zoning was normally written before, and unless you just regurgitate what the old comp plan says. So I would guess it probably is at odds. You know, to what degree, I can't remember. Certainly went through the zoning as we were doing this, but one of the recommendations in here is to look at updating the zoning ordinance, and that's normally, like I was just talking about that other community we're working in. We did their comp plan, went through the process, it got adopted, and then they right away went set forth to update the zoning, because then they could actually use the public input process and all for the comprehensive plan. You know, it saved them a couple bucks, first of all, but also just like the momentum, and it's like, oh, we're implementing a comprehensive plan to set update the zoning, and we did, you know. So it's usually like the most important thing, because otherwise you've got this comp plan, and not only is it not synced up, but the comprehensive plan doesn't protect you unless someone's coming to ask to do something like an amusement to, you know, or change the property or change the zoning or whatever. You know, unless the zoning says the zoning is the law of the land, it is the rule of what you can and can't do with the property, and it's the only way to really make, you know, things happen that you want to happen.
And we will, that is, you know, that's what we did the last time we did the comp plan, we did subdivision rates first, and then we did something with that, so we know we've got that. Make sure that we can implement what we've got here that we've identified, so.
Great, yeah.
Some of that
I
flexibility.
figured we were heading in that direction. I just wanted to make sure. I wanted everybody to hear how important it was. Yeah, I just want to make sure that all the great work that's in this plan gets into something that makes it happen, and it's not just a great idea.
Yes.
Other communities you've worked in, how have they allowed for flexibility? Because I know every project, every situation is not going to be everything you can imagine in a comprehensive plan or even design, and you got to allow yourself to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because in addition to working for cities, we also work for developers. And so we'll be doing private development projects and we present to the city and all of that. And what I find is so often, like when we're updating the zoning ordinance, we'll actually look at give us a list of all the variances you got for the past 5 or 10 years. We look like start to see what are those common things that people are asking for. And in some places, like in the state of Vermont, for instance, you can ask them for a list of variances for the past 10 years. And they say, oh, I don't need to give you a list. Here they are. It was this one, and there was that one, and there was that one. Right? And it's like not a thing. Because you have to prove a hardship. There's only certain things you can prove. It's a very serious situation. Developers know that. So they even ask. And so I think what you find is so often that I need flexibility because I can't make this work or that work with the zoning. It's like, it's better said, I don't want to make it work. It doesn't work for me, right? It's not like, granted, let's say, for instance, most modern zoning ordinances today say you need to have your have connectivity of your streets, right? You need to, and you have a piece of property and it's like ravines and whatever, and there's a few lakes, wetlands or whatever. As a priority in the community, or even based on state or federal regulation, you can't do something with that wetland to make a road go through. Then you go like, okay, well, that wasn't possible. But somebody's saying like, oh, well, I don't like this or that, or, I paid too much for this land and I need to get this much out of it. That's not really a you problem, that's a them problem, right? And so, the idea of having something that is prescriptive to a certain extent in your zoning, to say, here's the outcome, the character that we want. So things like building placement and height, massing, articulation, and materials and all things like that, for sure. And there's some fundamental things that you can put in there, even in the most minimal zoning ordinance. And then, they can knock themselves out, planning, being creative, doing all kinds of stuff, but you can give them some guardrails and some framework, but it's not like letting planning by variance happen, because basically at that point, you're getting your zoning written one project at a time. Yes, sir.
So you've had some time with this, you've looked at some of the preliminary data, and you're an outsider view looking in, basically, through that glass bowl. But as Athenians, what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats? What did you think about us? What are we missing that you feel that you see in other areas other than what you've addressed already tonight?
Well, there was a lot of all of that in what I talked about. So, I think that
It's an elevator pitch.
yeah, right. So read the plan. It's all in there. No, I think maybe I'll just put it together. How about that? Because the downtown, I sort of made that comment about it's one of the most useful. It's also beautiful and well thought of and well loved. I think you've got that. You've got the growth pressure of developments coming here for the numerous reasons they're coming here. You've got all the things that are going on regionally, so you're situated in a great location too. You've got this charm, the sort of social cohesion here. People seem to get along pretty well, and so I think we've got all of that stuff. And you're getting a Buc-ee's, for heaven's sakes, right? So that's. I didn't even know what Buc-ee's was until I came here. I hate to admit it, I never could. But since then, every time I'm going places, I go, oh, there's a Buc-ee's, and I'm okay, I get it now. Why I was so excited. But so you've got all kinds of things going on. You've got the suburban stuff, you've got the historic stuff, you've got the growth pressure. And I think really the key, the needle to thread for you all is to figure out how rigorous you want to be in your asks going forward, in your requirements going forward. Are you willing to, is it okay to dial back the number of building permits on a yearly basis because you said, hey, this is what's got to happen here. And some developers are like, yeah, that's not what I do. I just crank it out. And you go, okay, that's all right. That's the problems. In a lot of places we work with, they say like, we're okay with somebody going down to the next town over if they're going to give them that, and we didn't get that. That's not actually a bad thing for us. And so I think figuring out how hardcore you guys want to be is the thing. And so the plan kind of tries to lay it out in a way that is a bit tempered, right? In spite of the numbers that you have of people wanting to develop here. So it gives you that wiggle room to go one way or the other, more so or less. So.
I live down Highway 31 in another subdivision. And, you know, north and south of us, within 2 miles of my home, there are 856 neighborhoods. And here's how they do it. There's a tree on property, like a road that has some very unimaginative shape. And out of those 856 homes, 855 of them are gonna have a garage someplace.
Why not the last one?
So I didn't want to have to say all of them.
Oh, okay.
Except I feel like the proverbial horse is out of the barn.
You got some land though. Right, so some horses are out, but maybe not all of them. And I think, you know, really, the way that I look at it is sometimes it takes those things moving forward for people to go, oh, wow, I didn't realize that's what we meant, right? And you go like, well, but still, there's some good things about that, right? Even though it's not gonna be our postcard, we're gonna put on a, you know, billboard on the highway, and welcome to Athens or whatever. There's, you know, for the economic benefit of that, people who are here, maybe their businesses came because of those, they come here to buy business council, whatever. And so, you know, don't lose hope, but I guess the thing to know is that you can change course. And I mean, we work in places that are literally built out, like just working in Connecticut, and this place is founded in 1642, and so they're built out, and they're going, okay, well, now what do we do? We still need to grow, we still need to change and adapt, and so we're literally like helping them figure out how to retrofit things. I mean, there are, we don't talk about it much, but there are conventional suburban neighborhoods, kind of like when we describe it, it's called a little, built last year or whatever, where they're retrofitting them. There's books. Have you seen these ranch formation? It's like a book about how to turn a ranch or, you know, the 50s, 60s ranch house, and something that looks not like a 50s or 60s ranch house. And then even like we have workplace with cul-de-sacs and connecting streets, you know, the city might buy a house or two at the end of the cul-de-sac and put it in the street over to the other cul-de-sac that was so close, yet so far away. And now all of a sudden you don't have to get in your car and get out on the highway. There's so much traffic on 31. You go, well, it's because when we were developing our city, we developed in a way that every neighborhood, every subdivision, or every development didn't connect to the next one. So you have to go get out on the arterial, and that's what caused our own traffic problem. Because and it was like all cities did it. It's not like an indictment of like, oh boy, we just look at city after city. So it's not too late, but you have to be intentional about it and decide to do it differently, or not. You can also decide not to continue on. You know, I mean, I grew up in a suburban neighborhood, the cul-de-sac, all that. Here I am, you know, helping people do the opposite of that. A lot of places we work, but also a lot of places we work, they want to continue on with that too. Not only like you have been, or most places have been, but in addition to. So if somebody wants to do a conventional neighborhood like you described, maybe they can. But they could also do something different, and then you go like, it'll be more profitable for you, it will sell faster, it'll be more well loved, it will maintain its value, et cetera, et cetera. And so you don't have to be one or the other. A lot of places are deciding to be one or the other of these things, but some places aren't there yet.
How important is it though for government body to make those regulations to make that happen?
If you want to make it happen, that's the only way to do it, is to set the regulations so that it requires that to happen. At a minimum though, best practice recommendation is that you allow it to happen, right? Because most places we work, like this West Haven that I was just talking about in Franklin, most loved, and they had to fight. And you go through the whole process of the PUD, and it was like, beg, and please, can we do this? And like, oh, we got to prove it. You got to, like, they put them through the ringer to make this place that is the most loved place. And so one of the things you can do from our development client's perspective is to make it the easiest thing to do. So you may not even have to require it, but you can at least fast track it. You can at least make the process simpler. You can make it by right. There's all sorts of ways that can be done, but you have to decide at the governmental level to put the regulations in place. Yes.
Yeah, how would you respond to a comment? Let's say if I was living in like a Seafood or like a nicer development in R13 or higher density neighborhoods next to me. And I feel like that's gonna reduce my property. How would you respond?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that you hear all the time, right? But when you look at the data, it doesn't support it. It's just not true. It seems like you're just afraid. Like, what if it does though, right? And so people say, it will, and they emotionally say so. It doesn't. And so, I think that part of the problem though is that, like I was just describing in these neighborhoods that are like these new traditional neighborhoods, like you go down one street and you see some family houses here, and then you come, there's a park, and the park has townhouses around it, and maybe you go around the block on the same block. Maybe there's a 4-plex or 6-plex apartment, and it all fits right in. A lot of the times, the problem is when you have conventional subdivisions, conventional development, it's like everyone's competing at the most sort of superficial level, right? So like, what neighborhood do you live in? I live in this neighborhood. Oh, wow, that's so great. They have the coolest countertops and kitchens there, right? And you say, oh, where do you live? Oh, I live on 2nd Street, off the square, or whatever. Like we go there and just and we, it's like, and so there's so much to it. Nobody cares what the countertops are like. Nobody cares which model of house they have. It's like, oh, I just want to be here. I want to be on the street, that place. And so when you are operating at that level, and you're kind of every neighborhood is like every other neighborhood, then what are you left with? I'm exclusive. We're an exclusive neighborhood. Every house in the neighborhood is just like this, and people dare connect to those houses. They cost a little bit less than ours because we all know that the person who lives in that neighborhood next to ours actually, I work with them, right? Or they are the teacher of my children, or they are like normal people, right? And so I think that, as you're going through the process of being fearful about those things, like every place is in America, when you are talking about those kinds of changes in suburban development patterns, the evidence just isn't there. So the data's there. But you hear it a lot. That's where you would hear it, right? That's because that's where you come when you're concerned, right? But one thing that I think sometimes it's like a protective measure for the elected and appointed officials where they start letting this other stuff happen, because people actually will come out in support of projects, right? If it's the right kind of project, like, oh, this is so great, I can't wait to move there. Like, sign me up. And people come out wearing green shirts. And oh, yes. Yes. Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm bad about that.
A quick question, with what's proposed, the different areas of Virginia, together, so forth and so on. You've made a couple comments about, the data that does or doesn't work, what might be recommended in this plan. Is that backup data that shows the data does or doesn't, proves it, disproves it, whatever, is that available as part of this, or is that accessible somewhere?
There's some data in here. I don't know that it like literally goes and makes the case for each recommendation. Usually the data leads to a recommendation, but it's not like a prove it kind of situation. So as you go through, like when you've reviewed it, just let us know what you think about that, and if it's, or if there's specific questions about that, then we can see if we can give you some supplemental information about that.
Do you recommend there's a place where, like the broader, in the aggregate, that data exists to, a couple things we talked about, building upstairs, having on the corner, data shows this, or this thing, that data does address this? Is there a website or some place where we, as a body, might just be able to go look at that and go, okay, so we found a state that approved that, no issues?
Sure. Yeah, I think there are definitely places where you can go to find data about. No, I cannot speak into the mic. There are definitely places where you can go see, the data that reflects the benefits of some of these new traditional neighborhoods and those sorts of things, but something like we were just talking about connecting I don't know about that specifically, if there's any theory on for that, but there should be, because you wouldn't believe like how many times I've had this conversation, like most of the things we're talking about tonight. It really would be awesome if you just like go to, thelayemyfears.com,
What would this switch to Untitled? And we got everything. But like your experience at your organization where you've done it in the past and people have made it. You have that data where we recommended change, say it's a period of time. This is called
Yeah, normally, I wish it weren't so, but normally we're not scoped to do that, right? But we actually recently went back to a community because we were interviewed for a new project, and we're like, hey, we'd like to see some build results in one of their communities. And they had on the web page, it was like the old and the new, like they had set up, and it was awesome. So you could go and you could see the results, you could, qualitatively see like, oh, this is or not, but I couldn't, there wasn't a way for me to do this. Like, oh, that's the thought of that. And so, for instance, though, you can totally look at, let's say, here the farms, Providence, Huntsville, and you look at Zillow, right? And you just look at that and then look at the neighborhood next to it. You see the price per square foot, there's the data. However, there's one difference. Those neighborhoods that I just described or named were designed, planned, and built to be mixed. It's a mixed use. And so while they have those characteristics of streets connecting, different price points, et cetera, the overall is different than if you simply just connected those two digital subdivisions. Yes.
Traffic flow.
Yes, there's a section related to transportation, other things. So, but it doesn't, get down into the super fine grain of, necessarily make this, fix this here, whatever. That's why the recommendation that I talked about getting into more detailed implementation plan. It gets into higher level, but more detailed to solve the problems. But one of the big ways to solve the problems is to change the development pattern.
Based on all the input that you guys received from the community, it seems to be a relatively unanimous vision for what people want Athens to become. But what are some best practices so that vision from all the people in this room or all the people that attended those sessions are able to communicate that to leadership? Because obviously they're getting bombarded by developers that may have a whole different vision that's at odds with what the citizens want.
Yeah. Well, then, not only the developers, but oftentimes citizens, because like right now, if you live on a piece of property and your house is there, and tomorrow the farm across the street is about to break ground, and now you got those 856 units right next to you, then you may go, development, no, right? So you may come out against development. And so if you have the opportunity for that development to be something that you're like, oh, that's awesome, I could walk over there and do this, that, it's a bummer it's got to develop, but at least it's developing like that. So there's that thing that can happen. Like, as you go through the adoption process of this plan, coming and saying like, I like this is good, this is the vision, I am in favor of this, in fact, those things that that guy was saying about not being just like every other place, he heard that from me and from me. Because a lot of times I think people have the tendency to go like, if I'm standing up here, you're like, oh, well, that's what you want us to do. And I'm like, I don't want you to do anything. It doesn't have any impact on me. I'm reflecting to you the things that we heard as solutions to help you accomplish those goals. And so as you go through that process, I think showing support for the plan is the first step. And then when you do what Nick was saying about going to update your zoning work, it's the same thing. Be very intentional about that. So.
Brian, I think, I feel, Athens, some they, that today, one of the most desirable areas of Athens, our entire 42 square mile, is the downtown area. And it has everything we talked about. It has mixed use. It has the businesses that you can walk to. It has different product types as far as the types of housing. It has the historical houses that are, approaching $1 million, and within a quarter of a mile that has duplexes that are $150,000. So it has that, and it has, because of that, it has that community. It has the connectivity of the streets. We try to have as many sidewalks as we can. So, a lot of what we described, what we think we want, is really and truthfully kind of our downtown that we think about from, I say, from 31 to almost Jefferson, as far as 72 to at least Hines Street, over the Briar Street. So it has and kind of encompasses that course. That's what I hear a lot of people say we want, and that's kind of the future. We got it here. It's how you replicate it if that's what you go to other areas.
And that's a great point, because sometimes, like the town I grew up in, it was founded like 1963 or something, right? And so there literally was no downtown to reference, right? And so you're like describing these stuff, and people are like, oh, I think I saw it on vacation one time, or oh, I saw it when I went through Athens, or that was I think one of the reasons why in Franklin they were able to do West End, because they could go like that over there. We want to do the new version of it as best we can here, and we're actually going to consolidate the growth because we're going to be a little bit more compact instead of just taking the same number of units and spreading them across the rural countryside, right? And so having that precedent here, that's really the thing that you just go, yeah, this, more of that, right?
And Providence is kind of our back door. There's
Exactly.
if we look at
And it shows it's possible.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Just kind of picks out what the gentleman said about everything, but in your initial study, was there anything taken into consideration what the effects of the housing where we're going to have on the school system? We've got
Yes.
a lot of developments and things going on now throughout, and when you look at the school system, the zone, because each school, particular elementary or in particular zones, and you constantly are looking at hundreds of houses going in to a school that is down over there. Because with that, in any of the development stages, taking into consideration, if we do this here, what is that going to do to that particular school district?
Yes, there was a whole scenario planning process that happened as part of this. And so we were looking at costs, impacts, and revenue, and all of these different things, and trying to start to see and understand not just what you have now, and not just what's under construction, but even the stuff that's approved, and that you may not even realize is yet to come. And so, yes, is the answer to that, and the document goes into that to a certain extent, because it's important to understand, that the intended and unintended consequences of the way that you choose to develop. Yes, sir.
So I didn't hear nothing about crime.
Crime. Yes.
Yeah, crime.
Yeah. All places do. Yes. Yeah. So, the comprehensive plan level, obviously we had discussions with the police department and those who are addressing crime to look at what their needs are, projected, and part of that impact analysis is like if we here's the growth in the future, this many people, then you can assume that you need this many officers. or firefighters, so we talk to the different departments in regard to that. So to make sure that as you grow, you're able to keep up with those sorts of things, make sure your staff's sufficient to cover crime. But the thing that's great about it is, this is one of those things too that I think often surprises people. When you look at crime statistics, sort of on a per acre basis or something basis, the further in the suburbs you get, the more crime you're actually having than in the areas that are populated more densely. Obviously, it has some degree of caveats to go along with that, right? But what happens is when you create these neighborhoods that are like your downtown neighborhoods, there are people there and they have porches. They're looking out on the street. They're self-policing it. Like for me, every night, I turn my porch light on when I go to bed, right? Like who wants to creep up on your porch when the lights are on, right? And we have street lights. And so things are sort of well lit even at night and people are roaming around and people are walking on the street. And so some of these things that actually begin to help with some of those types of problems because it's not too intimidating if you're somebody who wants to be up to no good to like, this house is all by itself sitting off and it's all dark there. I'll just go there and no one can see me because the house is that way back in the street. And so it's something we take into consideration, but the comprehensive plan tends to be a higher level and more aspirational to get into the specific crime problem. Yes.
Is there something with regards to best practices on open space, green space? Because we've talked about conservation.
Yeah.
We've got to keep in mind the changes in our weather, the changes in the temperature, all that sort of stuff. Did you mention a while ago the farm and across the road there are 800 units going in?
Yeah.
All right, you're taking that farmland that absorbs rain, that absorbs sunlight, and putting asphalt and concrete. And you're going to increase the runoff and you're going to create a heat island. So is there a best practice on green space or open spaces, especially as more and more farmland around here gets developed with these amoeba-like extensions of subdivision development?
Yeah, so there's a section in the plan that addresses these types of things. The question is to what degree it gets into. Obviously, when you get into zoning too, you'd have specific requirements for percentages of open space. And we also think about open space in a bit more of a nuanced way. Most people would say like, oh yeah, more open space, more green space is the way they would refer to it in nearly every city we work in our town. And what we actually start to do is define that. What does that mean? Because what you want for open space in downtown is different than what you want for open space in, nature preserve or something like that, right? And so having specifics, we call them civic space types. So you have parks, greens, plazas, greenway, all of these kind of things. And so getting into that and understanding that is part of character, it's part of solving some of the issues that you were just describing. And then also too, when we're working on projects, plans, and zoning ordinances, we are often trying to find ways to allow and help communities learn more about and start using sustainable stormwater techniques. So that, like this little courtyard right here is a good example, like that water, there's actually a drain right there, so it's going in some pipe somewhere. We could have just as well had a rain garden in there, and rain barrels and cisterns and done something with that water. So it gets into that, but again, higher level. Watching for a break in the break. Yes.
The communities that you've done comprehensive plan for, what's the typical thing adopted? What's the typical timeline to all zoning ordinances and stuff like that you see?
Yeah, there is no typical timeline. The reason I say that is some places are more, let's study something and let's write plans, and other places are more about like, let's get about it, right? But also in the plan, there's a wide variety of things that some are quick and inexpensive that you could do tomorrow. And some are like, let's say there's a 20-year horizon in the time span on this plan. Some things in there may be like 100-year constantly, so we don't tend to limit ourselves by that. But so I always recommend to communities like pick a few things and do them right now. And then when you do them, like take the logo from this plan, make a seal, stick it on there. So we're like, oh look, that was from the plan, right? Make a big deal about it. And so people's like action starts to get people motivated and excited. The other thing is, you see, and there are very few places we work around the country that have unlimited resources to make things happen, right? So there's some limitations just based on finances of the city. But one thing you have that every city has is people, right? And so there's this idea today of crowdsourcing, right? Of sort of mobilizing the community to implement things. And, a lot of times when I say that, and the staff pulls me aside afterwards and they say, oh, don't say that, it's volunteers. They're like, oh, it's like, so you have to have somebody who's in charge of herding the cats that are all going to be, right? But if you can find ways to put people to work and to utilize that as human capital, you can start to implement those things. And also then you get citizens, like showing up at planning commission hearing or council meetings and saying like, hey, when are we going to do that thing? We're really excited about this. And here's how, we want to help. So I think, there's no good answer to that question, but whatever you can do soon and without spending a ton of money, do it right away. We have projects where, remember in Burlington, Vermont, we were doing their downtown and waterfront master plan. And before that plan was adopted, they were implementing things in that plan. They were just so fired up about it. It was so obvious that everyone wanted it. And it's just like, well, we got to go through the adoption process, but why not start? Let's go. So you don't need to wait.
That's a nice old city.
Yeah, I know, I love it. My wife is, my wife is from Decatur, and I hadn't been to Athens before except for to the Starbucks on the way to Decatur. And so I was so thankful to have a reason to come in and get to experience all of it, and it's pretty neat for sure.
Where did you mention Franklin? Franklin, Roman, or Franklin, Tennessee?
Franklin, Tennessee, yeah,
Tennessee.
just outside of Nashville. Yeah. Also a beautiful old city.
It is.
All right. Thank you all. I appreciate your interest, all of your questions, and this was a good one. A lot of times it's this part of the process is kind of everybody's like, I don't know, like wait till we get the plan and what we do, and then we'll tell you all the things. So thank you for thinking of questions, keeping on the document. So make sure you go look at it, go read it, go read the parts you want to, read it all if you want to, but also make sure that you come and tell the officials like what you think. Otherwise, they just have to guess. So have a good night.